So patch 14.9 hit live servers this week with a ton of buffs, nerfs and more changes. And today we're going to talk about those changes and dive into how this patch has affected the meta so far. Don't forget that this is the last patch of this ranked split, so it's time to grind and climb before it's too late. The arena has also returned for round 3, and we've got so much for you guys to check out on our website with prismatic item builds, augment recommendations, arena tier lists, and so much more. So check it out if you haven't already by clicking the link in the description. But now let's get back into the Summoner's Rift and start off with the top lane. And the item nerfs to Sundered Sky, Sterax, Eclipse and Hex Shrinker have had a bit of an impact on the meta here. Certain fighters and bruisers that relied on some of these items have taken a bit of a hit, but most of them have either stuck to their guns and continued to be successful or just built alternatives instead. Meta dominant champions like Fiora, Camille and Darius continue to prove to be a serious force though in the top lane. For champion specifics this patch we had buffs to Kennen and nerfs to Olaf, Skarner, Urgot and Akshan. Kennen's buffs were pretty big though, as his ultimate can now be cast whilst moving, which is honestly an amazing change, and has instantly been reflected in his whopping jump in win rate. Kennen has been a niche pick for so long and just needed that little boost to really pop back into the meta, and with a jump of almost 3% to his win rate in Emerald Plus, he's now up there in the S tier. Urgot has been a solid top lane pick for most of this season, and even though those bruiser items did get nerfed, he's been more reliant on Hullbreaker and Black Cleaver than the other options, so he hasn't had too much of a problem. He did get some specific nerfs to his armor growth too, but it hasn't for now been enough to take him out of the S tier. Despite Akshan's pretty low pick rate, he's actually had some insane stats in both of the solo lanes for a very long time now, and these adjustments are definitely more nerfs than anything else, nerfing his Q's movement speed and damage to minions, and slightly tweaking his ultimate's damage. We've got Akshan in the A tier at the moment, and seeing as he's still been strong in the right matchup since this patch, we're going to keep him there for the time being. Skarner's nerfs this week were once again aimed at forcing him out of the top lane and keeping him in the jungle, with nerfs to his mana regen and max Q damage, whilst also nerfing his W max options too. Well, it's safe to say he's finally taken a real hit in the top lane this patch, seeing a loss of almost 3.5% to his win rate, but his jungle performance is still strong enough to keep him in the S tier. In the top lane though, he does fall down to the A tier. Olaf got buffed again in the jungle with more Q monster damage, but nerfed in the top lane with 5 less damage on his Q and less resistances on his ultimate. This nerf has actually been enough to see him move down from the S tier to the A tier, with a loss of around 2% to his success rate so far this patch. So let's have a look at the top lane tier list then, and in the S tier we have Camille, Darius, Fiora, Gragas, Jax, Kayle, Kennen, Set, Urgot and Vale. Kayle is just an amazing option right now, and with some of her more difficult matchups being hit by the item nerfs, she's continuing to be a real problem. Set joins the S tier this patch too after proving he's not someone to be underestimated. Now let's get into the jungle, and here we had buffs to Amumu and Sejuani, and nerfs to Evelynn, Master Yi and Skarner, and some changes to Bel'Veth. We've already spoken about Skarner, and Master Yi's nerf to his E surprisingly had a massive impact, bringing him down from the S tier all the way to the B tier. Sejuani's buffs also brought her back up into the B tier from the C tier. Amumu has been pretty absent so far this season, aside from always being a really staple pick to play at lower ranks. But this patch he got some buffs to his base AD and armor. Now this didn't make him broken all of a sudden, but it has made him more relevant and seen enough of a boost to bring him up to the A tier. Evelynn got a nerf to her W slow and another nerf to her ultimate's AP ratio, taking it down from 75 to 65%. Now Eve has been a real problem, especially in the hands of Smurfs and one-trick ponies for quite some time now, but this patch has really put a dent in her performance, and for the first time in a long time she moves down into the B tier. Bel'Veth has been super strong for most of this season so far, and especially so in Emerald Plus, so it's about time we saw some changes. And with a drop to her win rate of approximately 1.5%, she moves out of the S tier. Don't get me wrong, she's still a really strong skirmisher and is great when things go to plan, but she's just not quite as freelo as she has been recently. So let's have a look at the jungle tier list next then, and in the S tier we have Brand, Ivern, Kindred, Lee Sin, Rek'Sai, Shaco, Skarner and Viego. Lee Sin was absolutely busted when this patch first went live, but it turns out it was a bug with his Q2 dealing absurd amounts of extra damage, and that has since been hotfixed. He does however stay in the S tier though. Viego remains one of the strongest and scariest junglers you can play right now, and Shaco shoots up for the first time in a long time to join him in the S tier, so don't forget about the clown this patch. Into the mid lane next step, and here we had buffs to Malzahar that didn't really make too much of a difference, and some nerfs to Ahri, Aurelion Sol, Kassadin and Taliyah. Ahri has been immensely strong since players discovered how good she is with Malignance in her arsenal, and with this item her mobility and damage with her ultimate feel really awesome to play with. This patch her ultimate's cooldown at later ranks got hit along with the base damage on her W, and this has had a bit of an impact bringing down her win rate slightly. Despite this though, we are going to keep her in the S tier for now, because she's just ridiculously consistent and insanely contested too. Aurelion Sol is another mid lane monster that's been winning a ton of games recently, and this patch we had a nerf to his E's AP ratio, which has surprisingly actually made a decent bit of a difference. This has brought him out of the S tier and down to the A tier. Now he's still a scaling beast with tons of AoE damage and carry potential, but he's not quite as consistent so far this patch as he has been in recent weeks. Kassadin's nerf was to his AP ratio on his E, which also saw him fall down into the A tier. Taliyah got some nerfs to her Q's mana cost as well, and bonus damage to monsters, which hasn't really had too much of an impact on her success rate so far. So how do these changes affect the tier list? Well, in the S tier we have Ahri, Akali, Anivia, Brand, Galio, Katarina, Sylas and Twisted Fate. Galio and Akali both prove they're here to stay this patch, and Anivia continues to be one of the highest performing mages in the game at most ranks, with a whopping 54% win rate so far this patch. Let's get into those AD carries in the bot lane next then, and we've had nerfs this week to Jinx and Twitch and some changes to Nilah. Next patch though, we've got massive crit changes and buffs to look forward to, so make sure you subscribe to learn all about it when patch 1410 comes around. It's safe to say that Jinx has been one of the best AD carries in the game at basically every single rank recently, and this patch she had a nerf to her ultimate's cooldown at levels 6, 11 and 16. The thing is, this doesn't really change what Jinx is super good at though, which is splashing and slapping her way through teams with her insane ranged AoE damage. Those resets are really what make her pop off, and even if she doesn't do that well in the early game, all she needs is a few items and one good fight to show just how strong she really is. Her win rate, pick rate and overall performance at almost every single rank is still just as high as it's ever been so far this patch, so as expected, she stays in the S tier. Twitch was one of the other AD carries that got nerfed this week, who's also had some crazy stats recently. His base health went down, his health growth went up, his W slow's AP ratio got nerfed, and his ultimate's bonus AD got hit as well. But despite all of this, he's still pumping out some serious numbers and getting a ton of wins. With so many enchanters running right at the moment, Twitch is just performing at his best, and when he gets the right matchups, he does just feel like free LP. Nilah's changes this patch were aimed at making her more of a consistent DPS threat rather than being super bursty. And this did make a difference because she took a pretty big hit this patch, and her win rate so far has dropped by around 3%, which really shows just how well she was doing before this patch. Now she moves down to the A tier, but she's still a great pick in the right games. In the S tier for the AD carry tier list then we have Ashe, Draven, Jhin, Jinx, Kog'Maw, Seraphine and Twitch. Jhin and Ashe maintain their impressive stats across most ranks so far this patch, and Draven and Seraphine move up to join them. Strong picks in the A tier like Samira and Vayne are still seriously scary in the right games. Finally, for support this patch there were buffs for Karma and Seraphine and nerfs to Blitzcrank and Pyke. And of course some adjustments to Janna, who's still excelling so far this patch as expected, and remains the strongest and most consistent support you can play in solo queue. Karma is such a weird champion. She's often irrelevant for large periods of time and then gets a few buffs and becomes super OP in the support and solo lanes to the point where she then gets gutted, which is exactly what happened earlier on this season. This patch Riot buffed her Q slow and her R and E combo, granting more movement speed at the same time. Well, these buffs were clearly aimed at buffing support Karma rather than making her OP again in the solo lanes. But it really does seem like she needs a lot more love to shoot up those tiers, as she hasn't really budged much in terms of her stats. Therefore, she's going to stay in the B tier for now. Seraphine is another one of those supports that can just be broken in other roles, like being played as an AP carry in the bot lane, and surprisingly this patch Riot gave her a bit of a boost to her Q's AP ratio. Already with this we've seen an improvement in support Seraphine, who moves up to the A tier, but has also shot back up into the S tier as an AP carry in the bot lane. Blitzcrank has always been an incredible pick in solo queue, and no amount of nerfs will really ever change the fact that those hooks have the ability to carry any game in the right hands. But generally speaking, Blitz has been a tad over consistent recently. This week his passive shield's duration got nerfed from 10 seconds down to 4, and his W's movement speed got hit too. And this has been enough to budge him out of the S tier and brought him down to the A tier for the first time this season. Pyke has also been a great solo queue carry pick too. So this patch, his W's mana cost got nerfed along with his cooldown. Pyke has been going through a bit of a purple patch recently and has been consistently performing at the top of his game for the last few months. So to us, it's expected to see a little bit of a nerf. And that is exactly what this is, a relatively small nerf to be honest. All this has really done is marginally weaken his roaming power and reduces his ability to use the Fog of War to his advantage to gank lanes and look for picks. But if you are a Pyke main, you'll be happy to know that he's still an incredibly strong pick and remains in the S tier for now. Well, let's have a look at the tier list then, and in the S tier we have Brand, Janna, Nami, Pyke, Rakan, Rel, Sona and Thresh. There really is just so much choice to go for at the moment in this role. The S tier is packed full of amazing choices, but the A tier also has loads of super strong options too. Enchanters like Lulu and Emilio are perfect picks in the right games with those hyper carries, and tanky engaging supports like Leona and Braum are also really proving to be great options to carry with. And that brings us to the end of our updated patch 14.9 tier list video. Don't forget that if you do need help on your grind with builds, runes, combos, stats, matchups and more, then download our desktop app to get access to a ton of great content to help you bring your gameplay to the next level before the end of this split. As always guys, thank you for watching and we'll see you next time. Take care.